Welcome to anonymous HR stories at gmail.com. Got a workplace scandal that'll make your jaw drop? We're exposing the true tales of HR corruption, nepotism, affair cover-ups, corporate malfeasance, illegal layoffs, and downsizing schemes that your company hoped would stay buried. If you've witnessed HR laws being shattered, whistleblowers being crushed, or management getting away with the kind of stuff that belongs in a courtroom drama, we want your story. Submit your story to anonymoushrstories@gmail.com. Stay anonymous, expose the truth. Operational Risk Alignment Q3. It was labeled Operational Risk Alignment Q3. That's how these things always start. A clean title, a professional font, a manila folder left on the corner of a mahogany desk like it was nothing more than a quarterly budget review. Nobody writes union suppression on the cover sheet. Nobody ever does. The conference room on the 18th floor had glass walls, a polished oak table, and a view of the river that most of the factory workers had never seen in their lives, and likely never would. The air smelled faintly of espresso and lemon polish. Someone had placed a bowl of fruit at the center of the table that no one would touch. A carafe of water with actual cucumber slices floating in it sat beside a tray of pastries from the kind of bakery that didn't list prices on their menu. Richard Halberd stood at the window, arms crossed, watching a white yacht drift slowly along the water. His yacht. Well, not technically. Not yet. But the deposit had cleared 2 days ago, and Marcus Brill, his broker, had already sent a bottle of scotch to the office with a note that read simply, "Patience, Richard." She's worth it. She was 62 feet. Teak decking. A master stateroom with marble inlays. A wet bar that his wife, Claire, had already begun decorating in her head, sending him photos from the manufacturer's catalog with little heart emojis next to the items she wanted. The yacht's name would be Meridian. He had chosen it himself. He adjusted his cufflinks, platinum, a 40th birthday gift from Claire, engraved with RMH on the back, and turned from the window. Around the table sat 4 people. Melissa Grant, VP of Human Resources, mid-30s, sharp, precise in every word she chose. She had a law degree she almost never mentioned, and an MBA she mentioned constantly. She wore charcoal blazers like armor and had a habit of pausing just long enough before she spoke to make you feel like your question had been slightly beneath her. Daniel Reeves, outside consultant, brought in from a firm called Strategian Partners, whose website was aggressively vague about what they actually did. He was 51, silver-templed, with a watch that cost more than most people's cars, and a way of leaning back in chairs that made everything he said feel like wisdom. Tom Greer, VP of Operations. Big, red-faced, the only person in the room who had actually worked a factory floor, briefly, 22 years ago, before he climbed far enough away from it that he'd stopped remembering what it smelled like. He had opinions about everything, and usually kept most of them to himself. Usually. And Janet Chu, legal. Quiet, watchful. The kind of attorney who takes notes on things no one else thinks to note, and who would only speak when she felt the conversation drifting somewhere that would eventually land on her desk. Richard sat down. "Close the door," he said. Tom got up and closed it himself, because the assistant who usually handled that was not invited to this meeting. "Say it plainly," Richard said. "What's happening?" Melissa slid a folder across the table. "Initial indicators of union activity at the Southgate plant. Nothing formal yet, but we have chatter. Significant chatter." Richard flipped it open. Printed screenshots. Anonymous forum posts on a subreddit called R Southgate Workers, created 11 days ago. Several threads. A grainy photo of employees gathered in the parking lot after a night shift, maybe 30 people in the circle. Another image. A flyer, photocopied, slightly crooked, that someone had tucked under a windshield wiper. It read, "You deserve better. We all do. Let's talk." "Where did you get this?" Richard asked. Melissa's expression didn't change. "We have people who pay attention." He looked at her for a moment. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. "How far along?" he asked. "Early," she said, "which is exactly why we can still shape this." Shape. That was the word she used. Not control, not kill. Shape. Janet wrote something in her notepad. Tom leaned back and crossed his arms. "I'll be honest," he said. "It's not nothing. I've been hearing things from floor supervisors for about 6 weeks. Pay grievances, scheduling, the new production quotas. People aren't happy." "People are never happy," Richard said flatly. "Sure," Tom said, "but right now they're organized about it." The room settled into a brief silence. Daniel Reeves set his pen down and looked at Richard with the measured calm of a man who had sat in this exact room, or rooms identical to it, many times before. "You don't stop a union once it's official," he said. "By then, the NLRB is involved. The media gets curious. Your investors start asking uncomfortable questions. The window to act is now, before anything has been filed, before any cards have been signed." Richard studied him. "And how do we do that without making it obvious?" Daniel finished. He smiled, just barely. "You don't attack the union. You make the employees choose not to want it." "There's a difference," Tom muttered. "A very important one," Janet said quietly, without looking up from her notes. "Legally." Melissa stood and clicked the remote. The lights dimmed slightly, and the screen at the end of the room lit up. The presentation was clean. No aggressive colors. No alarming language. It looked like a wellness initiative. Phase 1. Awareness and intelligence. "We begin," Melissa said, "by understanding exactly what we're dealing with, who's talking, what they're saying, and most importantly, who they're listening to." She clicked to the next slide, a spreadsheet, color-coded. "Every workplace has an informal power structure," she continued. "People who aren't management, but who function like magnets. When they speak, others orient toward them." "Influencers," Richard said. "Not in the social media sense," she said, "but yes, the person who's been there 12 years and everyone trusts. The shift lead who covers for people and remembers birthdays. The guy who fixed the broken break room sink himself because maintenance took 6 months to respond." She clicked again. Names and photographs appeared. 6 individuals. Marcus Teel, forklift operator, 14 years with the company. Known for running informal grievance discussions in the break room. 3 workplace safety citations filed under his name, 2 of which the company had quietly settled. Deandra Sims, assembly line lead, 9 years. Active in the online forums, had helped organize a 1-day sick-out 2 years ago that management had officially attributed to a flu outbreak. Roy Pacheco, maintenance technician, came up most frequently in the intercepted forum threads. Quiet but specific. His complaints were detailed, technical, and hard to dismiss. Callie Marsh, inventory coordinator, new, only 3 years, but highly popular, had apparently been collecting wage comparison data from public sources and sharing it. Jerome Banks, night shift supervisor, technically management, but had been attending the parking lot meetings. Angela Voss, HR liaison at the plant level. This one made Richard pause. "Angela works for us," he said. Melissa nodded. "And she's been in the parking lot meetings." A beat. "She's sympathetic," Melissa added carefully. "She's a liability," Janet said. "Not yet," Daniel said. "Not if we handle it correctly. You don't fire someone like her. You bring her back into the fold. Make her feel like a partner in the solution." "And if she doesn't want to come back into the fold?" Richard asked. No one answered immediately. "We'll cross that bridge," Melissa said. Daniel moved to the front of the room. This was the part of the presentation that wasn't in the slides. "I've managed 31 of these situations," he said. "Automotive plants, distribution centers, hospital systems, tech campuses. The approach varies by workforce. But the core principle is always the same." He picked up a marker and wrote on the glass panel beside the screen. "Grievance, voice, hope. These are the 3 things that drive union formation," he said. "People have a grievance. They feel they have no voice to address it. And they find hope, the belief that collective action might actually change something." He drew a line through each word. "You don't resolve the grievance, that's expensive and sets a precedent. You don't give them a real voice, that's just inviting demands. What you do is interrupt the hope. You introduce doubt. You make the promise of the union feel risky, uncertain, not worth the trouble." Tom shifted in his chair. That sounds legal, Janet said. Within bounds. Within what bounds? Tom pressed. Section 8 of the NLRA, Janet said, without missing a beat. You cannot threaten employees. You cannot make promises contingent on them rejecting a union. You cannot surveil union activity directly, but you can communicate. You can make business decisions. You can inform employees of potential consequences of unionization, as long as those statements are factual projections rather than threats. The line, Daniel said, is thin, but it's there, and we stay on the right side of it. Just barely, Richard thought, but he didn't say it. Melissa returned to the screen. The next slide was titled, Workforce Communication Strategy. We control the story, she said. We don't react to their messaging. We preempt it. She walked through a detailed communications plan. First, a series of town hall meetings, not at corporate, at the plant itself, brought to them. The language would be warm, collaborative, future-focused. Richard would appear at one of them, briefly, enough to be seen. Second, an anonymous feedback portal, new, branded, professionally designed. Your Voice Matters, the working title they'd use. Employees could submit concerns, questions, complaints. They would receive responses within 72 hours. From who? Tom asked. A dedicated response team, Melissa said. Will they actually get answers? They'll get responses, she clarified. Third, a series of one-on-one conversations between supervisors and their direct reports, guided conversations. Melissa slid a laminated card across the table, talking points for floor supervisors. Richard picked it up and read. We understand there are concerns about wages and working conditions. The company takes these seriously. However, bringing in a third party, like a union, often means losing the direct relationship we've built with our employees. Union dues can cost workers $500 to $800 per year. That's money out of your paycheck with no guarantee of results. In companies that have unionized, we've often seen plant closures and outsourcing increase, not decrease. That's a risk we want you to be aware of. Richard set the card down. The plant closure line. Factual, Daniel said immediately. There are documented cases. It'll read as a threat, Richard said. It's a business reality, Daniel said. If costs become unmanageable, the economics of this plant shift. That's not a threat, it's disclosure. Richard stared at him. Is this how you sleep at night? He asked. Daniel held his gaze. Comfortably, he said. You'll learn to also. Across town, in a different kind of room, Marcus Teel was eating a sandwich over a folding table covered in papers. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, deliberate in his movements, with grease permanently set into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of washing ever fully removed. He'd been at Selfgate since he was 27, when the plant was still owned by a regional manufacturing company before Halberd Industries acquired it in a leveraged buyout. He remembered the acquisition, remembered the all-hands meeting, the new logo on the lunchroom wall, the promises about investment and growth and being part of something bigger. He remembered watching the pension plan disappear 18 months later, replaced with a 401 match that the company had twice reduced. He wasn't a radical. He wasn't angry exactly. He was tired, and he was specific. Across from him sat Roy Pacheco and Deandra Sims. They know, Deandra said. The way Martinez has been acting lately, they know something's coming. Of course they know, Roy said. He was methodical in everything, including his pessimism. They always know. They have HR people whose entire job is to watch for this. So what do we do? Deandra asked. Marcus took a long drink from a water bottle. We keep going, he said. We follow the process. We don't do anything that gives them ammunition. No walkouts, no public statements, nothing emotional. We do this exactly right. And the organizer? Roy asked. Meeting Thursday, Marcus said. Neutral location, off-site. Deandra tapped the table. Jerome's been quiet. Jerome's scared, Marcus said. He's got 3 kids. I understand it. Angela, too, Roy added. Marcus nodded. He'd sensed the shift in Angela, the way she'd started sitting a little farther from the main cluster at the last parking lot meeting. the way she'd avoided his eyes when he passed her desk. "She won't work against us," he said. It was half assertion, half hope. Nobody challenged it. The Halberd house was a colonial revival on 4.2 acres in Dunmore Hills. 6 bedrooms, a pool, a 4-car garage with a Porsche and a Land Rover parked side by side like a catalog advertisement. Richard sat in his study that evening with a glass of the scotch Marcus Burrell had sent him. He wasn't thinking about the plant. He was thinking about his father. Gerald Halberd had owned a hardware store. Not a chain, a single store, in a town that no longer existed in the way he remembered it. Gerald had known every customer by name, had carried accounts for people who couldn't pay immediately, had closed for 3 days when a family 2 blocks over lost a child, because he knew them, and because it seemed like the right thing to do. Richard had worked the register in high school, had swept the floors, had thought at the time that there was something almost embarrassing about the smallness of it. Now, 30 years later, he thought about it differently. His father had never made real money, had worked hard for 40 years and retired to a modest house in Florida with modest savings and a modest sense of satisfaction. What's the point, Richard had thought, at every step of his own ascent, of working hard if you don't end up with something to show for it? The yacht, the cufflinks, the country club dinners. He had something to show for it. He took a long sip of scotch. Claire appeared in the doorway. She was already in her silk robe, her blonde hair down, looking effortlessly composed the way she always did, at every hour of the day. It was one of the things he'd found magnetic about her, once. Now, it sometimes felt like a performance he'd stopped being the audience for. "You're brooding," she said. "I'm thinking. Same thing with you." She came in and sat across from him, folding her legs beneath her. "What's the problem?" "Work." "The plant thing?" He looked at her. "How do you know about that? You said something last week. Something about rumblings. You had that look." "What look?" "The look where you're calculating something," she said. "Adding up numbers, but the numbers aren't quite cooperating." He almost smiled. "It'll be fine," he said. "Of course it will." She studied him. "Is it the union thing people have been talking about? Where are you hearing that?" "Lisa Harrington mentioned it at tennis. Her brother-in-law is in manufacturing. Said it's happening all over." Richard stared at his glass. "It's handled," he said. "Good," Claire said, uncurling from the chair, "because I've already told the Reiners we'd sail with them in August, on the Meridian." She smiled. Practiced, beautiful, certain. "Don't let anything get in the way of August, Richard." She left him with that. He sat in the quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and read the latest report from Melissa. The first town hall was held on a Tuesday afternoon in the largest section of the Southgate facility, the loading bay, cleared out and arranged with folding chairs. 214 employees attended. 47 had found reasons not to. Richard stood at the front with Melissa beside him and Tom slightly behind. He was wearing what Melissa called approachable business casual, dark slacks, a light blue shirt, no tie. She had specifically told him, "No tie. It creates distance." He'd almost reached for one that morning by reflex. "Thank you all for being here," he said. His voice was steady. He'd practiced with a communication consultant the previous afternoon, a 2-hour session in a conference room where he'd been told he led with authority but needed to soften entry points. He spoke for 12 minutes. He acknowledged that the company had been through significant transitions. He used the word family 3 times. He said, "We're listening" twice, and "your concerns matter" once, which Melissa had said was the right ratio. He mentioned a forthcoming wage review, carefully, precisely the way Daniel had scripted it. Not a promise, just an acknowledgement that the process was underway. He told a story about visiting a plant in Ohio years ago and shaking hands with a man who'd been with the company for 30 years. It was fictional, but nobody knew that. Afterward, he walked the floor. Melissa shadowed him at a slight distance, close enough to hear, far enough to seem like she wasn't listening. He stopped at Marcus Teel's station. Marcus was back at work by then, checking inventory manifests. He looked up. "Marcus," Richard said, extending a hand. He'd memorized the key names. Marcus shook it. Firm. Measured. "Mr. Halberd." "How long have you been with us?" 14 years, Marcus said. Richard nodded. That's a long time. You know this place as well as anyone. Maybe better, Marcus said. Polite, not unfriendly, just honest. What would make things better for you? Richard asked, specifically. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, a pause that Richard found he could not read. Consistent scheduling, Marcus said finally. Advance notice. People have lives outside this building, Mr. Halberd. They need to be able to plan. That's fair, Richard said. And the safety issues in Bay 4, Marcus added. Roy Pacheco's filed 3 reports in the last 2 years. Nothing's been addressed. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. Richard glanced at Tom, who was suddenly very interested in the ceiling. I'll look into it personally, Richard said. Marcus nodded. Appreciate that. He looked back at his manifest, and Richard moved on. In the car back to corporate, Richard sat in the back seat and said nothing for a long time. Then, fix Bay 4. Tom blinked. That's a significant... Fix it, Richard said. Whatever it costs, fix it this week. Melissa was watching him from the corner of her eye. That'll be received as responsive leadership, she said. I don't care how it's received, Richard said. Just fix it. It was one of the only things he said that day that was completely, uncalculatedly true. Behind the scenes, the other mechanisms were already in motion. Marcus Teel received a formal letter, delivered to his station in a sealed envelope, informing him that he had been identified as a candidate for the newly created Senior Forklift Operations Specialist role. A 9% wage increase, a reserved parking spot, priority scheduling consideration. He read it twice. Then he set it on his kitchen table that night and looked at it for a long time. They know, his wife, Renata, said. She was a practical woman who had watched the situation develop with a mixture of pride and dread. Yeah, he said. What are you going to do? He picked up the letter. Nothing yet, he said. Deandra Sims received something different. A disciplinary notice, her first in 9 years, citing a scheduling conflict she'd flagged 3 weeks earlier, in which she'd left her station 12 minutes early due to a childcare emergency she had documented. It was technically a policy violation. It had also happened to 11 other employees in the same quarter, none of whom received notices. She called Roy from her car, voice tight. I told you, Roy said. Evenly applied pressure. They call it consistency. We call it what it is. I want to respond, she said. Don't, he said. Not yet. Document it. Keep your head down. Thursday is still happening. She pressed her palm against the steering wheel. Roy, I know, he said. I'm not backing down. I know, he said again. Neither am I. Angela Voss sat in Melissa Grant's office the following Wednesday afternoon with the particular stillness of someone who had spent the past several days rehearsing this conversation. Melissa had offered her tea, Earl Grey. Angela had accepted, though she didn't want it. I appreciate you making time, Melissa said, as if Angela had a choice. Of course, Angela said. Melissa opened a folder, not theatrically, casually. Angela, you've been with the company for 6 years. Your performance reviews have been consistently strong. People at the plant trust you. That's valuable. Angela said nothing. I also want to be direct, Melissa said, because I think you deserve that. Angela's hands, both wrapped around the mug, tightened slightly. We're aware that you've been attending some informal employee gatherings, Melissa said. I want to understand what's driving that from your perspective. Angela looked at her. I live in that community, she said. My neighbors work at that plant. Some of them are my friends. Of course, Melissa said. That makes sense, and I want to understand what you're hearing from them. This, Angela thought, is the interrogation disguised as a conversation. I'm hearing that people feel unheard, Angela said, carefully. That's important feedback, Melissa said, which is exactly why we're launching the feedback portal and the town halls. You can be part of that process, Angela. In fact, we'd like you to help lead it. Angela studied her. What does that mean exactly? We'd like to create a new position, Melissa said. Plant-level employee relations manager, based at Selfgate. Salary increase of approximately 18%. Your role would be to serve as a genuine bridge between employees and leadership. Angela sat with this. And if I declined? Melissa's expression didn't change. That would be your right, she said, though I'd want to understand why. The two women looked at each other across the table. Angela understood perfectly what was happening. The question was whether the offer was real enough, whether the role would have any actual power, or whether it was a velvet cage, designed to extract her from the circle of people who trusted her, while turning her into a visible symbol of corporate responsiveness. She asked for 48 hours to think about it, Melissa said, of course. That evening, Angela sat in her car outside the Selfgate plant and watched the last of the day shift walk out. Marcus walked past, lunch cooler in hand. He glanced at her car, recognized it, and gave a small nod. She didn't wave back. She was still deciding. Not many people knew where Daniel Reeves went at the end of a project. He flew home, a condo in Dallas, sparse, deliberately impersonal, and spent 3 days doing almost nothing. He ordered food, he watched baseball, he sat on the balcony and looked at the city. He'd started his career in labor law, representing workers. He no longer thought about that often. The pivot had happened gradually, the way most pivots do. A consulting offer after a case, then another. Then the realization that the money was significant and the work was clean and he was good at it. He told himself the distinction mattered. He had never advised anything illegal. He had never counseled retaliation. Every tactic was documented, defensible, carefully constructed to stay on the permitted side of the NLRA. He believed this, most days. He thought sometimes about a plant in Tennessee 6 years ago, a warehouse that had voted to unionize by 11 votes. The campaign he'd run had been textbook, clean, effective, almost successful. 11 votes. After the election, the company had announced a restructuring. The warehouse closed within 18 months. 300 people lost jobs. The company said it was unrelated to the union vote. Daniel knew it wasn't. He had not worked with that company again. He wasn't sure whether that decision made him better or simply less complicit. He sat on his balcony in Dallas with a beer and watched traffic move below him and thought about Marcus Teel's photograph in the file. 14 years, safety citations the company had settled, a man who had simply decided that enough was enough and that there should be a mechanism to say so. Then he finished his beer, went inside, opened his laptop, and began the debrief report for Strategian Partners. Thursday came. The union organizer, a woman named Patricia Kwan, from the regional branch of the IBEW, seconded to industrial labor campaigns, met with Marcus, Roy, Diandra, and 3 others in the back room of a Filipino restaurant 12 miles from the plant. She had done this 47 times in her career. She spread the card count sheets on the table. Based on what you've told me, she said, you had roughly 60% interest 3 weeks ago. How does it feel now? Marcus exhaled slowly. Softer, he admitted. They moved on Jerome. He's been quiet. 2 of the informal leaders got promotions. And you? Patricia asked. I got offered a specialist title and 9%, he said. What did you say? Nothing yet. She nodded. They're running a textbook soft campaign. Phase 1 is almost always the same. Identify your organizers, neutralize the influencers, introduce just enough uncertainty to make the rank and file hesitate. Can we still get to 50% plus 1? Deandra asked. Patricia looked at her card counts. Possibly, she said, but I need to be honest with you. If their communications team is competent, and from what you're describing, they are, they'll introduce enough doubt in the next 3 to 4 weeks to drop your margins significantly. We'd need to move quickly, transparently, and assume they're watching every external communication. They are, Roy said. I'm fairly confident they have someone monitoring the subreddit. So we move off-platform, Patricia said, in person only for the next phase. And we need to make a decision. Do we go for a card check authorization or do we aim for a formal election? The table was quiet. Marcus looked at each of them. He thought about Bay 4, where the safety report had sat unanswered for 18 months. He thought about Deandra's disciplinary notice, her first in 9 years, delivered within 2 weeks of visible union activity. He thought about Angela Voss, who had not returned his nod in the parking lot. He thought about Richard Halberd, shaking his hand on the floor, looking him in the eye and saying, "I'll look into it personally." And the fact that, to everyone's genuine surprise, Bay 4 repairs had actually been ordered the next morning. That was the part that complicated things, because it meant the grievances weren't entirely being ignored. It meant that some of the things they'd been asking for might be addressed. Not fully, not consistently, but enough to give people reasons to hesitate. And hesitation, as Patricia had said, was the whole game. "What happens," Marcus said finally, "if we wait? If we let them implement the feedback portal, let them run the wage review, let them do all the things they're promising, and then nothing changes?" "You'll have lost momentum," Patricia said. "Organizing campaigns have a window. Emotion fades. People go back to managing their individual lives. And if we move now and lose, you'll have lost something harder to rebuild," she said. Marcus sat with that. "Give me 2 more weeks," he said. Patricia looked at him. 2 weeks, she said, "and I need you to accept that the window may close." "I understand," Marcus said. He understood something else, too, that accepting the specialist title would close it faster. He called the HR line on Friday morning and declined the offer, citing personal reasons. Melissa reported this to Richard that afternoon. He stared out the window. "He turned it down," he said. "Yes. What does that tell you?" "That he's committed," she said. Richard said nothing for a moment. "Can we still stop this?" "Probably," she said. "But it'll take more than messaging. We need real concessions. Wage review needs to produce actual numbers, not projections. Scheduling policy needs to genuinely change. And Deandra Sims's disciplinary notice needs to quietly disappear." "That last one," Richard said, "sounds like an acknowledgement that it shouldn't have been issued." "Yes," Melissa said, "because it shouldn't have been." He looked at her. She held his gaze, the first time in the entire process she had looked at him with something other than professional calculation. "Richard," she said, "some of what they're asking for is reasonable." He turned back to the window. "I know," he said. The wage review was released 6 weeks later, an average 6.4% increase across the Southgate plant, not the dramatic overhaul Marcus's group had pushed for, but real, documented, implemented within 30 days. The scheduling policy was revised. 2 weeks advance notice required for all shift changes. A hardship exception process was created for childcare and medical situations. Bay 4 was repaired, inspected, and certified. Roy Pacheco received a formal acknowledgement, unsigned, from Safety and Operations that the repairs had been completed. The disciplinary notice against Deandra Sims was reviewed and withdrawn. Angela Voss accepted the Employee Relations Manager role. She negotiated 2 conditions: that her office would be located on the plant floor, not in the administrative building, and that her direct reports would include line workers she helped select, not management appointees. Melissa had agreed. Whether that made Angela a collaborator or a genuinely empowered advocate, she was still figuring out. By the time Patricia Kwan came back for the follow-up meeting with Marcus's group, the numbers had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that the authorization drive, which had peaked at 58% expressed interest, had drifted back to somewhere in the low to mid-40s. Marcus sat at the folding table in a community center room this time. The Filipino restaurant had a private event, and looked at the count sheet. He was quiet for a long time. "We could still push," Deandra said. "The wage review wasn't enough. 6% doesn't close the gap we've got against industry average." "No," Marcus said. "Roy?" Deandra said. Roy was looking at his hands. "I don't know," he said. "I got the safety acknowledgement. The repairs are real. If someone had gotten hurt in Bay 4 before this happened..." He stopped. "I just don't know." Patricia watched them. She had seen this too, 47 times. The exact moment when a campaign reaches its inflection point, the place where the grievances are real, the organization is real, but the will to keep going collides with the fatigue of having already made the company move, even partially, even incompletely. "This isn't over," she said carefully. "If the concessions don't hold, if the scheduling policy gets walked back in 6 months, if the next wage review produces nothing, You'll be back here, and you'll be starting from a harder position. I know, Marcus said. Do you want to keep going? She asked directly. Marcus looked at Deandra, then at Roy. Not right now, he said quietly, but not never. Patricia nodded. She closed her folder. Then document everything, she said. Every promise, every policy, every number. Because if they backslide, and some of them will, you'll want the record. She shook their hands and left. Marcus sat in the room for a while after. He thought about his 14 years, about the pension they'd taken, about the 401 that was better than nothing but not as good as what it replaced, about Bay 4, about how it had taken 18 months of filed reports and a unionizing movement to get a machine fixed that should have been fixed within the week. He picked up his phone, sent a text to Renata. Heading home, we'll talk. Richard Halberd stood at the same window on the 18th floor. The Meridian was his now. She was docked at a marina 40 minutes south of the city. He'd taken her out twice, once alone, once with Claire and the Harringtons. The teak decking was everything the catalog had promised. He held Melissa's final report. Situation stabilized. Organizing activity significantly reduced. Key concessions implemented within budget. No formal union petition filed. Clean. Efficient. He set it down. He thought about Marcus Teel, turning down the specialist title. The quiet, specific dignity of that refusal. He thought about Deandra Sims's disciplinary notice, which had been his idea, technically, in the sense that he had approved the consistent enforcement strategy without asking what it would look like in practice. He thought about Bay 4. He thought about the fact that it had taken a labor organizing movement for him to stand on his own factory floor for the first time in 3 years. He poured a glass of water, stood at the window. The river below was the same river it had always been. Moving, unhurried, indifferent to the things people built on its banks. He thought about his father's hardware store, about the accounts Gerald had carried for people who couldn't pay, about a specific afternoon when Richard was maybe 15, when a man had come in after losing his job, and Gerald had quietly reduced what he owed by 60% and told him to pay when he could. And when Richard had asked later why he'd done it, Gerald had said, "Because I've had bad years too, and because it's the right thing." Richard had thought it was naive then. He thought about Marcus Teel shaking his hand on the factory floor with 14 years of grease-stained calluses and a specific list of things that needed to change. He wasn't his father, he knew that. But the question that arrived now, uninvited, and refused to leave quietly, was whether that was something to be proud of. He picked up his phone, not to call the broker, not to confirm August with the Harringtons. He called Tom Greer. "The Bay 4 repairs," he said. "How many other areas in the plant have outstanding safety reports?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Honestly," he said, 11. Richard closed his eyes briefly. "Fix them," he said. "All of them. This quarter." "That's this quarter, Tom." He hung up, stood at the window, thought, it doesn't make it right, but it's something. Far across the city, in a break room that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, Marcus Teel sat on a plastic chair with his lunch cooler open and his phone on the table. Deandra sat across from him, Roy beside her. "So that's it?" Deandra said. "For now," Marcus said. She was quiet. Not satisfied, not defeated, something in between that didn't have a good word for it. "The scheduling policy held this week," Roy said. 2 weeks advance notice. It was actually on the board. 1 week, Marcus said. 1 week is 1 week more than 0, Roy said. Marcus looked at his lunch, a sandwich Renata had packed. Turkey, the good mustard, a note tucked inside the way she'd done since their kids were in elementary school. His kids were teenagers now. He unfolded the note. "Don't forget your dad's birthday Saturday, and I'm proud of you, whatever happens." He folded it back up. "We watch," he said. "We document, and at the first sign they're backsliding, we move," Deandra said. "We move," he agreed. He picked up his sandwich. Outside, machines were running. Metal was meeting metal. The plant was doing what it had always done. But something, however small, had shifted. Not enough, but something. And Marcus Teel, who had worked these floors for 14 years and who had turned down a 9% raise because he understood exactly what it was for, ate his lunch and watched the clock and waited. He was good at waiting. He had done it before. He would do it again. The folder, eventually, was shredded. It had been labeled Operational Risk Alignment, Q3. That's how these things always end, too.